Absolute idealism is the name given to the philosophical system of G.W.F. Hegel, but he did not coin this name. The name of the philosophy only really means one thing, the philosophy of G.W.F. Hegel. Beyond this, it says nothing to us, for on encountering it, no common person or philosopher has a proper understanding of what kind of philosophy they are dealing with. It is easily apparent with but a little thought that a category populated by one single thinker is not a useful category at all. There are various objective idealists and subjective idealists, but Hegel alone is an absolute idealist. At least, that's the common story. Due to the nature of Hegel's philosophy as an irreducible many-sided system, it is impossible to communicate in any singular way. To say that it is absolute does not convey just what absoluteness entails for Hegel. To say that it is the consummate truth also does not convey much. This is generally true of all great philosophy, but it is truer for Hegelianism than for most. What is absolute idealism anyway? Idealism. The idealism of Hegelianism must be contrasted from idealism as generally understood in common speech and philosophical lexicons. Let us consider what idealism is not. Hegel's idealism is not idealism in the common sense of the word, for it has nothing to do with the pretension to shape what the world is, or to tell us what the world should be, that is, moral or utopian idealism. It is radically anti-utopian and anti-millenarian in the sense of being at odds with any thought or project to save the world by theoretical or practical means which fall contingently to us and our will. In fact, Hegelianism is simply at odds with the belief that the world needs saving, for such would imply that the good and God is not already in the process of actualization. Hegelian idealism is not to be confused with philosophical positions such as what may be termed consciousness idealism, the view that all that exists is the phenomenality of conscious experience. It must not be confused with unconscious idealism, such as the idealism of the world being a fundamental and irreducible blind desiring will. It must not be confused with solipsism, for the concept of freedom has the consequence of the generation and letting be of a plurality of beings, which are not falsehoods or illusions, but real moments. It must not be confused with subjectivism, for there is no finite individual which determines the world or reality, and the infinite individuality, or the idea or God, is not that of a singular personality like ours. For God there is no other but themselves, yet they themselves are the existence of the infinite community not only as self-conscious, but as absolutely free, and the existence of freedom is a community of free beings. Idealism is also not the belief that mere intent has supernatural effects on external reality, that is, occult or spiritualist idealism. It is not to be confused with a position too often falsely imputed to Plato, the belief that there is another realm of reality which is purely intellectual and eternal, which grounds the finite phenomenal world and which is the highest and true reality. Now, Hegel does claim that all things are essentially thought, and that mind is all reality. So what does this mean? What Hegel means by idealism. Hegel offers three eminently related yet distinct meanings to idealism and that which is ideal. He defines idealism in the science of logic as follows. Quote, "The claim that the finite is an idealization defines idealism. The idealism of philosophy consists in nothing else than in the recognition that the finite is not truly an existent. Every philosophy is essentially idealism, or at least has idealism for its principle, and the question then is only how far this principle is carried out. This applies to philosophy just as much as to religion, for religion also, no less than philosophy, will not admit finitude as a true being, an ultimate, an absolute, or as something non-posited, uncreated, eternal. The opposition between idealistic and realistic philosophy is therefore without meaning. A philosophy that attributes to finite existence as such true, ultimate, absolute being does not deserve the name of philosophy." Now, above we have named the principle or the universal, the ideal, and still more must the concept, the idea, spirit be so named. And then again we have described the individual, sensuous things as ideal in principle or in their concept, still more in spirit, that is, as sublated. Here we must note, in passing, this twofold aspect which showed itself in connection with the infinite, namely that on the one hand the ideal is concrete, veritable being, and on the other hand the moments of this concrete being are no less ideal, are sublated in it. But in fact what is only the one concrete whole from which the moments are inseparable. End quote. Idealism acquires its name for a few reasons. One is a homage to the genius of Plato, for whom the idea plays the role of unifying the objective material realm and conceptual intelligible realm, in that the ideas explain both the rational organization of objectivity and the knowledge of that objectivity in concepts. The idea is Hegel's highest logical category, the crown of pure philosophy, as such, the truth itself. Another reason is that what is revealed as the truth of finite beings and finitude as such is the universal, the immaterial and unlimited, which can only be grasped as a thought, an idea in the common sense of the term, and not as any natural object. Idealism has a double meaning, denoting both a low and a high ideality. There is the ideal with a capital I, and there is the ideal. These are not separate nor truly opposed meanings, as Hegel notes in the quoted passage. The capital I ideal is ideal in the same way that the infinite is finite. This distinction, which is no essential distinction, is made clear in the following. Quote, "There is only one being for another, and since this is only one being for another, it is also only being for one. There is only the one ideality, of that for which or in which there should be a determination as moment, and of that which should be a moment in it. Being for one and being for itself do not, therefore, constitute two genuine determinacies, each as against the other. Inasmuch as the distinction is momentarily assumed and we speak of a being for itself, it is this very being for itself, as the sublated being of otherness, that refers itself to itself as to the sublated other, is therefore for one. In its other, it refers itself only to itself. An idealization is necessarily for one, but it is not for an other. The one for which it is only itself. Being for itself and being for one are not, therefore, diverse significations of ideality, but essential, inseparable moments of it." The German expression for querying the quality of a thing, "What for a thing is this or that?" though strange at first, reflectively brings out the moment here considered. This expression is idealistic in origin, since it does not ask what this thing A might be for another thing B, not what this human being might be for another human being. It asks rather what this is for a thing, for a human being, so that this being for one is at the same time taken back into this thing, into this human being, or that which is, and that for which it is are one and the same, an identity, such as ideality must also be considered to be. Ideality at first attaches to the sublated determinations as distinguished from that in which they are sublated, which by contrast can be taken as the real. The result is that the idealization is again one of the moments and the real the other. Ideality, however, consists in both determinations being equally only for one and having only the value of a one, and this one ideality, thus undifferentiated, is reality. End quote. Thus it is clear that the ideal as totality or universal is ideal as particular or existence. This is the absoluteness of idealism. Absolute idealism, then, is the philosophy of that which has for its object, and knows this object to be, only itself as a moment of itself. To call it idea, or being, or universe may seem to ultimately be a matter of mere appearance, but in Hegelian thinking, an appearance is not without consequence or meaning. These words have very specific weights in our cultural lexicons, and so to redefine them against popular understanding is to purposely consign philosophy to a willful and perpetual misunderstanding. Idealism, therefore, is a term name consequent to the method itself in its concrete historical and conceptual specification. What it means for something to be ideal is that it is only as a part of the capital I ideal, and what it means for something to be capital I ideal is that for which what faces it is nothing but itself as a moment. There's only one ideal, and many idealizations, but the ideal must itself be an idealization for itself. That is, the totality as totality faces itself as an existent. This is what spirit is. Thus we see in the mere word ideal the high sense of the Platonic ideal, that which is most perfect and best, and the low disdainful sense of that which is merely ideal, a pretentious figment of thinking which remains abstract and unrealized. The ideal is what all things ought to be, and indeed already are in their very being, even as they have no awareness of it. It is thus the normative measure of our judgments, but it is not idealistic in an abstract moral disappointment in reality, nor is it a command that reality should be rectified, idealized, by power of the moral subject imposing truth upon the world. The Ideal and Idealization. Quote, negation is thus determined as ideality. The idealized is the finite as it is in the true infinite, as a determination, a content, a distinct but not a subsistent existent, a moment rather. Ideality has this more concrete signification, which is not fully expressed through the negation of finite existence. End quote. The ideal is meant in different senses, and implies all of them in all uses. First, it is meant in the sense of a figment of thought, a vanishing moment of something else, something which has no independent reality of its own. That which has no independent reality is like the figments of our minds, our idealizations, which only exist by virtue of our idealizing minds. Consider a mirage, which is nothing beyond its own vanishing appearance, as we come close enough to see it for what it is. It is ideal as a figment of our own projection, as well as of the complex phenomenon of light's reflections on invisible clouds of evaporating water. A more direct and intuitive idealization is anything in our imagination, which exists only insofar as we focus and maintain its being by our willful power to maintain the sensuous presentation within our minds. All that is finite is ideal in this sense. Quote, the durable existence, that is, the substance of an existence, is its self-sameness, for its non-self-sameness would be its dissolution. However, the self-sameness is pure abstraction, but this pure abstraction is thought. End quote. The second sense of the ideal is as pure thought or pure abstraction. All that exists at all, even the non-existent, must be distinct or parted from something else. This parting from is abstraction. Abstraction in the common understanding tends to mean two things, and both are considered damning. A vague concept or something that exists merely mentally. Hegel is not guilty of the first, and by common conception not guilty of the second, insofar as what he means by thoughts are not simply mental representations. In method, Hegel is a complete opposite of vagueness. Indeed, it is the strongly interwoven concepts which cause much of the mental suffering to the new reader, who mistakes him to be just another philosopher whose concepts can be taken up as mere propositional definitions. Like the ideal, abstraction is distinguished from the concrete in being emphasized as merely apart from a concrete whole and without the relations which are the very conditions of its own existence. All that is finite is ideal. The finite is a literal abstraction that has no reality outside the infinite or absolute. In another view, the idea alone may be considered truly abstract, insofar as it stands alone without an other, of which it would be part of, or parted from. Such a view, however, would be mistaken in considering abstraction abstractly, as if the infinite ideal itself can be reduced to the finite ideal. All that is finite has substance and essence that neither empirically nor conceptually has absolute standing upon close inspection, but points beyond itself. Finite things may be ideal, may be abstractions, but they are no mere vanishing figments or illusions. They are real moments or parts of reality. This pointing beyond itself of finitude is itself a pointing towards an ideality in the sense of thought as such. Finite things point towards their essence and truth as an intelligible, immaterial universal principle. Whether one calls the truth of things matter, spirit, energy, forces, laws of nature, etc., these truths are concepts unlike the immediate sensuous appearance or material corporeality of things. This ideality, however, is not a mere dead abstract vague representation defined as a language or logical construct. a proposition, and done away with as in the common notion of ideality, but is the determinateness of the thing itself in intelligible form, that is, a concept. As concept, it is a self-differentiated unity developed through other concepts internally related to each other in systematic fashion. It is concrete. Such concept is a unity of unity and difference, or a unity of identity and difference, which links what is with what it is not. As concept which has a concrete universal structure, the ideal is the principle of development and existence of finite things, yet these finite things are themselves part of the ideal concrete structure into which they seem to vanish. As parts, they are moments of the ideal, which themselves are as necessary as the totality which they comprise. The most concrete things we believe we point to, the tangible objects of the senses, are mere idealizations, figments of a higher real process which posits their coming to be, their momentary subsistence, and their ceasing to be. It is this process which is substantial and endures over materiality, but which never appears as a material object, since it is only apparent to thinking minds. The image of the ideal as totality and infinity is impossible, and yet it is the most possible of all due to its concreteness. The idea is gravity. The idealized is the plurality of material bodies which realize the gravitational process. The idea is the ecosystem. The idealized are the flora and fauna which fill niches and promote mutual complementary existence. The idea is the life cycle of the animal, and the idealized are the moments of its childhood, its adulthood, its life, and its death. Most of all, the idea is you and I, who in thinking come to understand there is only one world which is an infinite self-interconnected being, that we are one with the one who is all, and that we are the universe knowing itself as a self-knowing and self-making being. This final image is freedom itself. It is the final meaning of absolute idealism. Ignorant, where it was, there I went. Knowing, where I will, there it shall. For the one, nothing alien remains. What is before the infinite is only itself. From eternity it has always been, always is, and always shall be. The infinite one lords by letting all things be. Self-sought, all is done. If you enjoy the content of this channel, like and subscribe. I have a Patreon linked in my About page. If you feel like it, send me a donation. This has been Antonio Wolf. Thank you for listening.